In the golden age of Hollywood, when studio executives held the power to make or break careers with the stroke of a pen, one contract clause buried deep in legal paperwork nearly destroyed the most iconic blonde bombshell the world had ever known. Marilyn Monroe, the woman who would become synonymous with beauty, tragedy, and stardom, found herself trapped in a web of corporate control so suffocating that it almost silenced her forever before she could whisper those legendary words, "Happy Earth Day, Mr. President." The year was 1946, and Norma Jean Dougherty was just another hopeful face in a sea of aspiring actresses flooding Hollywood's casting offices. With her natural brunette hair catching the California sun and desperation gleaming in her eyes, she had no idea that the contract she was about to sign would become both her golden ticket and her gilded cage. 20th Century Fox, a powerhouse studio that had launched countless careers, presented the 20-year-old with what seemed like salvation wrapped in legal terminology. The standard 7-year contract promised $125 a week, a fortune for a young woman who had spent her childhood bouncing between foster homes and orphanages. But hidden within the dense paragraphs of legal jargon was a clause so restrictive, so controlling, that it would later be dubbed by industry insiders as the career killer. This particular clause, buried on page 14 of the 23-page document, granted the studio unprecedented control over every aspect of an actor's professional life. It wasn't just about the films they would make or the roles they could accept. It was about their very identity. The studio could dictate their name, their appearance, their public persona, and most devastatingly, their ability to work anywhere else in the entertainment industry. Little did Norma Jean know, as she signed her name with trembling fingers, that this clause had already claimed several promising careers. Just 2 years earlier, a talented actress named Patricia Williams had refused to comply with similar restrictions and found herself blacklisted from every major studio in Hollywood. Her dreams of stardom ended not with a whimper, but with complete industry silence. The young woman who would soon become Marilyn Monroe had unknowingly stepped into a trap that had been carefully crafted by studio moguls who viewed actors not as artists, but as valuable property to be controlled, manipulated, and discarded when no longer profitable. Behind the mahogany doors of 20th Century Fox's executive offices sat Darryl F. Zanuck, a man whose influence over Hollywood was so absolute that even other studio heads whispered his name with a mixture of respect and fear. With his trademark mustache and penetrating stare, Zanuck had built an empire not just on talent, but on control, absolute, unwavering control over every star. Under his studio's banner, Zanuck's philosophy was simple yet ruthless. Actors were investments, not individuals. They were to be molded, shaped, and directed according to the studio's vision, regardless of their personal desires or artistic ambitions. The contract clause that would nearly destroy Marilyn's career was Zanuck's brainchild, a legal mechanism designed to ensure that no actor could challenge the studio's authority or seek better opportunities elsewhere. The clause, officially known as Section 12B in studio contracts, contained what industry lawyers called the golden handcuffs provision. It stated that any actor under contract who refused a role, violated studio conduct policies, or attempted to work for competing studios would face immediate suspension without pay, followed by an automatic extension of their contract period to compensate for lost time. More insidiously, it included a morality clause so broad that virtually any behavior could be interpreted as grounds for contract violation. What made this clause particularly dangerous was its reciprocal nature with other major studios. If one studio suspended an actor for contract violations, the others would honor that suspension, effectively blacklisting the performer from the entire industry. It was a closed-loop system that gave actors no recourse and no escape. Zanuck had seen too many promising stars leave for better deals at competing studios, and he was determined to ensure that 20th Century Fox's investments would remain exactly that, their exclusive property. The human cost of this corporate strategy was of little concern to a man who measured success solely in box office receipts and studio profits. For Norma Jean, now renamed Marilyn Monroe by the studio's publicity department, this clause would become a sword hanging over her head for years to come. The transformation of Norma Jean Dougherty into Marilyn Monroe was not the romantic Hollywood fairy tale that studio publicity departments would later spin for eager fans. It was a calculated, systematic reconstruction of a human being according to corporate specifications, with every detail of the process governed by that fateful contract clause. Under the studio's meticulous guidance, Norma Jean's natural brunette locks were bleached to a platinum blonde, so striking that it seemed to glow under studio lights. Her name, chosen by Fox executive Ben Lyon, was derived from Broadway star Marilyn Miller and her mother's maiden name, Monroe. Even her voice was altered through extensive coaching, transforming her natural speaking tone into the breathy, sultry whisper that would become her trademark. The studio's control extended far beyond physical appearance. Marilyn's social life, her romantic relationships, and even her personal friendships were subject to studio approval. The morality clause in her contract meant that any behavior deemed inappropriate by studio executives could result in immediate suspension and career destruction. For a young woman still discovering her own identity, this level of control was suffocating. Acting coach Natasha Lytis, assigned by the studio to work with Marilyn, later recalled the actress's growing frustration with the restrictions placed upon her. She felt like a beautiful bird in a golden cage, Lytis remembered. Every time she tried to spread her wings creatively, the bars seemed to close in tighter. The studio's publicity machine worked overtime to create the Marilyn Monroe persona, carefully crafting an image of effortless sensuality combined with innocent vulnerability. Photo shoots were choreographed down to the smallest detail. Interviews were scripted, and public appearances were staged events designed to reinforce the studio's vision of their star. But beneath the carefully constructed facade, the real woman was struggling. The contract clause that had seemed like a blessing was beginning to feel like a curse, and Marilyn was starting to realize that her dreams of artistic fulfillment might be forever out of reach as long as she remained bound by its restrictive terms. By 1950, Marilyn Monroe had appeared in several small roles, but the promise of stardom seemed as distant as ever. The studio, bound by their own rigid system, continued to cast her in minor parts that showcased her physical attributes while offering little opportunity for dramatic growth. Each role felt like another link in the chain that bound her to mediocrity, and the contract clause that governed her every professional move seemed designed to keep her exactly where the studio wanted her, visible enough to generate revenue, but never powerful enough to demand creative control. The breaking point came when Marilyn was offered a substantial role in All About Eve, director Joseph L. Mankiewicz's highly anticipated drama about Broadway theater. The part would have allowed her to work alongside Bette Davis and Anne Baxter, two of Hollywood's most respected actresses, and could have established her as a serious dramatic performer rather than just another blonde bombshell. But 20th Century Fox executives, following the letter of the contract clause, refused to loan her to the production. They argued that her existing contract obligated her to appear only in Fox productions, and that allowing her to work on an outside project would set a dangerous precedent. The decision wasn't based on scheduling conflicts or financial considerations. It was about maintaining absolute control over their contractual property. Marilyn's agent, Johnny Hyde, fought desperately to secure her release for the film, arguing that the role would increase her market value and benefit the studio in the long run. But the contract clause was ironclad, and Fox executives were unmovable. They had invested in creating Marilyn Monroe according to their specifications, and they would determine how and where that investment would be utilized. The loss of the All About Eve opportunity was devastating for Marilyn, who saw it as confirmation that her contract was not a pathway to stardom, but a barrier to artistic achievement. The role eventually went to a lesser-known actress who delivered a memorable performance and earned critical acclaim, recognition that could have been Marilyn's if not for the restrictive clause that governed her career. This incident marked the beginning of Marilyn's growing awareness that her contract was not protecting her interests, but actively working against them. The year 1954 marked a pivotal moment in Marilyn Monroe's career and the contract clause that had controlled her. Professional life was about to face its greatest challenge yet. Having achieved considerable success with films like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and How to Marry a Millionaire, Marilyn was no longer the desperate young actress who had signed her life away 8 years earlier. She was now a proven box office draw, and more importantly, she was beginning to understand her own worth. The crisis that would nearly end her career began with a script titled The Girl in Pink Tie. Studio chief Darryl Zanuck's response was swift and merciless. Invoking the dreaded Section 12B of her contract, he immediately suspended Marilyn without pay and announced that her contract would be extended to compensate for the lost time caused by her rebellion. More devastatingly, he made it clear that no other studio would be permitted to work with her during her suspension period. The suspension meant more than just lost income. It meant professional exile. Under the terms of the contract clause, Marilyn could not work in films, television, theater, or even nightclub performances. She was effectively banned from the entertainment industry that had made her famous, trapped in a legal limbo that could potentially last indefinitely. Hollywood insiders whispered that Marilyn Monroe's career was over, destroyed by her own hubris. In challenging the very system that had created her, faced with professional annihilation, Marilyn Monroe made a decision that shocked Hollywood and demonstrated a business acumen that few had credited her with possessing. If the studio system wanted to treat her like property, she would find a way to own herself. In a move that was both brilliant and desperately risky, Marilyn announced the formation of Marilyn Monroe Productions, her own independent production company. The announcement, made at a press conference in January 1955, sent shockwaves through the industry. Here was the ultimate studio creation, the woman who embodied everything Hollywood had built her to be, declaring her independence from the very system that had made her famous. But the contract clause that had brought her to this point was still in effect, and 20th Century Fox was not about to let their most valuable asset simply walk away. Studio lawyers immediately filed for an injunction to prevent Marilyn from working with any other production entity, arguing that her existing contract gave Fox exclusive rights to her services as a performer. The legal battle that ensued would determine not just Marilyn's future, but potentially reshape the entire studio system that had dominated Hollywood since its inception. Behind the scenes, Marilyn was surviving on borrowed money and sheer determination. Her suspension meant no income, and maintaining her lifestyle while fighting a major studio in court was financially devastating. Friends later recalled that she sold personal jewelry and moved to a smaller apartment to fund her legal battle. But she never wavered in her resolve to break free from the contract clause that had controlled her life. The press, initially skeptical of the blonde bombshell's business capabilities, began to take notice of her strategic thinking. Marilyn had allied herself with respected photographer Milton Green, who became her business partner in the production company, and had secured the services of top entertainment lawyers who understood the complexities of studio contracts. What the industry didn't realize was that Marilyn had been studying her contract for years, looking for loopholes and weaknesses in the very clause that bound her to Fox, Her apparent rebellion was actually a carefully calculated legal strategy designed to exploit the studio system's own contradictions. As Marilyn's legal battle with 20th Century Fox intensified, the conflict began to divide Hollywood's power structure in ways that no one had anticipated. The case wasn't just about one actress's contract dispute. It was about the fundamental nature of the studio system and the degree of control that corporations could exercise over human talent. On one side stood the studio establishment, represented by executives like Darryl Zanuck, who viewed Marilyn's rebellion as a dangerous precedent that could inspire other stars to challenge their contracts. They argued that the stability of the entire industry depended on honoring existing agreements, regardless of how restrictive they might seem in retrospect. The contract clause that bound Marilyn to Fox was, in their view, a legitimate business arrangement that she had entered voluntarily. But Marilyn's cause began to attract unexpected supporters from within the industry itself. Directors like Billy Wilder, who had worked with her on The 7-Year Itch, publicly stated that her talents were being wasted in the formulaic roles that Fox continued to assign her. Even some executives from competing studios privately supported her fight, seeing an opportunity to challenge Fox's dominance and potentially acquire Marilyn's services for their own productions. The most significant support came from an unexpected source. Joseph Schenck, one of the founding fathers of 20th Century Fox, and a man whose influence in Hollywood was legendary. Schenck, now in his 70s and reflecting on his legacy, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with the restrictive nature of studio contracts. In a private meeting with Marilyn, he reportedly told her, "The system we created has become a monster. It devours the very talent it's supposed to nurture." Meanwhile, the entertainment press found themselves covering a story that had all the elements of classic Hollywood drama: beauty, power, rebellion, and the potential downfall of an icon. Columnists like Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons, who typically supported the studio system, began to question whether the contract clause that bound Marilyn was truly in anyone's best interests. The battle lines were drawn, and the outcome would determine not just Marilyn Monroe's future, but the fate of every actor working under similar contractual restrictions throughout Hollywood. While lawyers battled in courtrooms and the press speculated about Marilyn's chances of survival, the real negotiations that would determine her fate were taking place in the private dining rooms and luxury suites of Beverly Hills' most exclusive establishments. The contract clause that had seemed so ironclad was about to face its greatest test in the shadowy world of Hollywood deal-making. Studio chief Darryl Zanuck, despite his public stance of unwavering opposition to Marilyn's rebellion, was privately concerned about the financial implications of the dispute. Marilyn Monroe had become one of Fox's most valuable assets, generating millions in box office revenue, and her continued suspension was costing the studio significant money. More worryingly, other stars under similar contracts were watching the case closely, and any sign of weakness could inspire a wave of similar rebellions. The secret negotiations began in earnest when powerful agent Charles Feldman, representing several major stars, approached Fox with a proposal. Rather than destroying Marilyn Monroe and potentially destabilizing the entire contract system, why not find a way to modify the existing agreement that would satisfy both parties, while maintaining the studio's authority over other contracted performers? Feldman's proposal was ingenious in its simplicity. Fox would retain Marilyn's services, but under a revised contract that granted her unprecedented creative control over her projects. In exchange, she would commit to making a specific number of films for the studio, while being allowed to pursue independent projects during designated periods. Most importantly, the revised agreement would eliminate the most restrictive aspects of the original contract clause while preserving Fox's investment in their star. The negotiations were conducted in absolute secrecy, with meetings taking place in private homes and exclusive restaurants throughout Beverly Hills. Marilyn herself was often present, surprising industry veterans with her detailed understanding of contract law and her unwavering focus on securing creative freedom rather than just financial gain. But even as these private discussions continued, the public battle raged on, with neither side willing to show any sign of weakness that might compromise their negotiating position. The entertainment world watched and waited, unaware that the real decisions were being made far from the courthouse steps and press conferences that dominated the headlines. As 1955 progressed, Marilyn Monroe's legal battle with 20th century Fox had evolved from a simple contract dispute into something far more significant, a test case that would determine the future balance of power between studios and stars. The contract clause that had begun as a routine business arrangement was now being scrutinized by lawyers, agents, and industry executives throughout Hollywood, all of whom understood that the outcome would affect their own careers and business relationships. Other major stars under similar restrictive contracts began to speak out in support of Marilyn's cause, though often in carefully coded language designed to avoid provoking their own studios. James Dean, and at the height of his fame, was quoted as saying, "Every artist should have the right to choose their own canvas," a statement widely interpreted as support for Marilyn's position. Even established stars like Clark Gable and Spencer Tracy made subtle comments about the importance of creative freedom in their craft. The uncertainty surrounding Marilyn's case was affecting the entire industry. Studios became reluctant to offer new long-term contracts with similarly restrictive clauses, fearing that they might face legal challenges from other performers. Agents began advising their clients to demand modifications to standard studio agreements, citing the Monroe case as precedent for more favorable terms. Perhaps most significantly, the case was attracting attention from outside Hollywood. Labor unions, civil rights organizations, and business publications began to examine the studio system's practices, raising questions about whether the level of control exercised over performers was legally and ethically justifiable in modern America. The contract clause that had once been a routine piece of legal boilerplate was now being dissected in law schools and business journals as an example of potentially exploitative corporate practices. Legal scholars debated whether such restrictive employment agreements violated fundamental principles of personal freedom and professional autonomy. Meanwhile, Marilyn remained in professional limbo, unable to work but unwilling to surrender. The woman who had once been dismissed as merely a beautiful face was proving to have the courage and determination to challenge one of the most powerful institutions in American entertainment. The breakthrough in Marilyn Monroe's seemingly impossible battle came not from a courtroom victory or a boardroom negotiation, but from an unexpected shift in public perception that caught both the studios and the entertainment press completely off guard. The contract clause that had been designed to control and limit her career was becoming a symbol of corporate overreach in the rapidly changing social climate of mid-1950s. America. The turning point arrived when respected journalist Edward R. Murrow featured Marilyn's story on his influential television program See It Now. Murrow, known for his serious journalism and recent success in challenging Senator Joseph McCarthy, presented the contract dispute not as typical Hollywood drama, but as a fundamental question about individual rights versus corporate power. His measured, authoritative presentation of the facts surrounding the restrictive clause transformed the narrative from celebrity gossip into a serious discussion about labor practices and personal freedom. Public opinion, which had initially been divided on whether Marilyn was a principled artist fighting for creative freedom or simply a difficult star making unreasonable demands, began to shift decisively in her favor. Letters poured into studio offices and entertainment publications, with many Americans expressing outrage that any employer could exercise such comprehensive control over an employee's professional life. The changing public mood was reflected in the entertainment press, where columnists who had previously supported the studio system began to question the fairness of contracts that granted corporations such extensive power over individual performers. Even conservative publications like The Hollywood Reporter ran editorials suggesting that the industry needed to modernize its approach to talent agreements. Studio executives, particularly at 20th Century Fox, found themselves in an increasingly uncomfortable position. The contract clause that had once been their most effective tool for controlling talent was now being portrayed as an instrument of oppression. Worse, the negative publicity was beginning to affect the studio's other business relationships, with some exhibitors and distributors expressing concern about being associated with what was increasingly seen as unfair labor practices. For Marilyn, the shift in public opinion provided something even more valuable than legal victories, moral authority, and popular support that made her cause impossible for the studios to simply dismiss or ignore. By late 1955, the battle between Marilyn, Monroe and 20th Century Fox had reached a critical juncture that neither side could afford to lose. The contract clause that had started this war was now being tested in ways its creators never intended, and the outcome would determine not just one woman's career, but the future of talent relations throughout Hollywood. Studio chief Darryl Zanuck, facing mounting pressure from Fox's board of directors and increasingly negative publicity, made one final attempt to break Marilyn's resolve. In a move that shocked even hardened Hollywood veterans, he announced that Fox was prepared to extend Marilyn's suspension indefinitely and would actively prevent any other entertainment company from hiring her, regardless of the cost to the studio. The threat was unprecedented in its scope and vindictiveness. Zanuck was essentially declaring that he would rather destroy Marilyn Monroe's career completely than allow her to work under terms other than those specified in her original contract. The message to other stars was clear: challenge the studio system and face total professional annihilation. But Zanuck had miscalculated both Marilyn's determination and the changing dynamics of the entertainment industry. Her response to his ultimatum was delivered through a carefully orchestrated press conference that demonstrated her growing sophistication in handling media and public relations. Standing before a room full of reporters, she calmly announced that she would rather never make another film than surrender her rights as an artist and a human being. The contract clause that binds me to Fox was written to serve their interests, not mine, she stated, her voice steady and her words carefully chosen for maximum impact. I am not property to be bought and sold. I am a human being with rights and dignity, and I will not be treated as anything less. The response to her statement was immediate and overwhelming. Telegrams of support arrived from fellow performers, directors, and even some studio executives from competing companies. Labor unions offered their assistance, and civil rights organizations praised her courage in challenging what they characterized as an exploitative system. Most significantly, the financial markets began to react. Fox's stock price dropped as investors questioned whether the company's inflexible approach to talent management was sustainable in a changing entertainment landscape. The resolution of Marilyn Monroe's contract dispute came not with the dramatic courtroom victory that Hollywood scriptwriters might have crafted, but through a series of pragmatic negotiations that demonstrated how economic reality could overcome even the most entrenched corporate policies. The contract clause that had seemed unbreakable was about to be shattered by the simple recognition that destroying valuable talent served no one's interest. In December 1955, after nearly a year of legal battles and public relations warfare, representatives from 20th Century Fox quietly approached Marilyn's legal team with a proposal that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. The studio was prepared to tear up the original contract entirely and negotiate a completely new agreement that would grant Marilyn unprecedented creative control while still maintaining a profitable relationship with Fox. The proposed deal was revolutionary by studio standards. Marilyn would be allowed to choose her own directors for Fox films, reject scripts that she deemed unsuitable, and pursue outside projects during specified periods each year. Most importantly, the new contract would eliminate the restrictive clauses that had given the studio absolute control over her career, replacing them with a true partnership agreement that recognized her value as both a creative artist and a business entity. The negotiations that produced this breakthrough were intense and detailed, with both sides recognizing that they were establishing precedents that would affect the entire industry. Marilyn's business partner, Milton Green, proved instrumental in crafting terms that protected her interests while addressing the studio's legitimate concerns about their investment in her career. Fox executives, led by Xanax deputy Spiros Skouras, had finally accepted the reality that the old system of absolute studio control was becoming obsolete in an industry where stars increasingly had the power to take their talents elsewhere. The contract clause that had once seemed like the foundation of studio authority was now recognized as a barrier to profitable talent relationships. When the new agreement was finally signed in February 1956, it represented more than just Marilyn Monroe's personal victory. It was the beginning of a fundamental shift in how Hollywood would treat its most valuable assets. The era of stars as studio property was coming to an end, replaced by a new model based on mutual respect and shared financial interests. The signing of Marilyn Monroe's new contract with 20th Century Fox sent shockwaves through Hollywood that were felt for decades to come. The precedent she had established by successfully challenging the restrictive clause that had nearly ended her career opened the door for other stars to demand similar treatment, fundamentally altering the balance of power between talent and studios. Within months of Marilyn's victory, agents throughout Hollywood were citing the Monroe case as justification for renegotiating their clients' existing contracts. Stars who had previously accepted restrictive terms without question were now demanding creative control, script approval, and the right to pursue outside projects. The contract clause that had once been standard in studio agreements was suddenly being viewed as an outdated relic of a more authoritarian era. The immediate beneficiaries of Marilyn's breakthrough included some of Hollywood's biggest names. James Stewart negotiated a groundbreaking profit-sharing deal with Universal that made him one of the wealthiest actors in Hollywood history. Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas formed their own production companies, following the model that Marilyn had established with Marilyn Monroe Productions. Even established stars like Gary Cooper and William Holden were able to secure better terms in their contract renewals. But perhaps the most significant impact was on the next generation of performers who entered Hollywood after Marilyn's victory. Young actors like Paul Newman, Joanne Woodward, and Elizabeth Taylor were able to negotiate contracts that granted them creative input and financial participation that would have been impossible under the old studio system. The restrictive clause that had nearly destroyed Marilyn's career was becoming extinct, replaced by agreements that treated performers as creative partners rather than corporate assets. Studio executives, initially resistant to these changes, gradually recognized that the new system could actually be more profitable than the old one. Stars who felt respected and valued were more likely to deliver exceptional performances, and the elimination of restrictive clauses reduced the legal disputes and negative publicity that had previously plagued studio talent relationships. The entertainment industry was evolving, and Marilyn Monroe's successful challenge to her contract had accelerated that evolution in ways that continue to influence Hollywood to this day. While Marilyn Monroe's victory over 20th Century Fox was celebrated throughout Hollywood as a triumph for artists' rights, the personal cost of her battle was enormous and would continue to affect her for the remainder of her too brief life. The stress of fighting the studio system, combined with the financial hardship of her suspension, had taken a toll on both her physical and emotional well-being that success could not entirely heal. During the long months of legal uncertainty, Marilyn had struggled with depression and anxiety that manifested in increasingly erratic behavior and a growing dependence on prescription medications. The pressure of being seen as a symbol for artists' rights while simultaneously fighting for her own professional survival had created an emotional burden that few understood at the time. Her relationships had suffered as well. The man she married during the height of the contract battle, playwright Arthur Miller, later admitted that the stress of the legal fight had affected their courtship and early marriage in ways that neither of them had fully anticipated. The woman who had once been dismissed as merely a beautiful face had proven herself to be a formidable businesswoman and legal strategist, but the effort had required her to develop a harder, more calculating public persona that sometimes conflicted with her natural warmth and vulnerability. Financially, the victory had come at great cost. The legal fees, lost income during suspension, and expenses of maintaining her public profile during the battle had consumed most of her previous earnings. While her new contract promised greater financial rewards, the immediate aftermath of her victory was marked by continued financial stress and uncertainty. Perhaps most significantly, the intense scrutiny that had accompanied her legal battle had made privacy virtually impossible. Every aspect of her personal life was now subject to public analysis and media speculation, a situation that would persist for the rest of her career. The contract clause that had once restricted her professional freedom had been replaced by a different kind of imprisonment. The relentless attention of a public that now saw her as both a symbol of artistic independence and a fascinating public figure whose every move generated headlines. The victory was real and meaningful, but it had come at a price that few could have predicted or understood. In the decades following, Marilyn Monroe's successful challenge to the restrictive contract clause that nearly ended her career, the entertainment industry underwent a transformation so complete that younger generations of performers could hardly imagine the system she had fought to change. The precedent she established became the foundation for modern talent representation and the creative partnerships that define contemporary Hollywood. The contract clause that had once given studios absolute control over their performers' careers became a cautionary tale taught in law schools and business programs as an example of how restrictive employment practices could backfire spectacularly. Legal scholars studying the Monroe case identified it as a pivotal moment in the evolution of labor relations, not just in entertainment, but across American industry. Modern stars like Meryl Streep, Robert De Niro, and Julia Roberts owe their creative freedom to the battle that Marilyn fought in the 1950s. The profit-sharing agreements, creative control provisions, and partnership arrangements that are now standard in major studio deals can all trace their origins to the precedents established during her contract dispute with Fox. Perhaps most importantly, Marilyn's victory demonstrated that individual determination could overcome seemingly insurmountable institutional power when combined with strategic thinking and public support. Her success inspired not just other performers, but workers in various industries who faced similar restrictions on their professional autonomy. The irony of Marilyn Monroe's legacy is that a woman, often remembered primarily for her beauty and tragic early death, was actually responsible for one of the most significant advances in workers' rights in entertainment history. The contract clause that was designed to control and limit her became the catalyst for changes that liberated countless other performers from similar restrictions. Today, when actors negotiate complex deals involving creative control, profit participation, and artistic approval rights, they are exercising freedoms that exist largely because one determined woman refused to accept that her dreams and talents could be owned by a corporation. The blonde bombshell, who was underestimated by studio executives, proved to be a revolutionary who changed Hollywood forever. The story of the contract clause that almost ended Marilyn Monroe's career is ultimately a testament to the power of individual courage in the face of institutional oppression. What began as a routine business arrangement designed to control a young actress became the catalyst for transforming an entire industry's approach to talent relations. Marilyn Monroe's victory over 20th Century Fox proved that even the most powerful corporations could be challenged successfully when their practices conflicted with fundamental principles of human dignity and creative freedom. Her willingness to risk everything she had worked for in order to secure the right to control her own artistic destiny established precedents that continue to benefit performers today. But perhaps the most important lesson from Marilyn's battle is that progress often requires individuals who are willing to sacrifice their own immediate interests for the greater good. She could have accepted the limitations of her original contract and lived comfortably as a studio property for the rest of her career. Instead, she chose to fight for principles that would benefit not just herself, but countless other artists who would follow in her footsteps. The contract clause that nearly destroyed her career ultimately became the foundation for her greatest legacy, not as a beautiful actress or tragic figure, but as a pioneering advocate for artists' rights who changed Hollywood forever. What do you think? Did Marilyn Monroe's courage in challenging the studio system inspire other changes in Hollywood that we still benefit from today? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more hidden stories from Hollywood's golden age. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones that happen behind the scenes, fought by people who refuse to accept that their dreams can be owned by anyone but themselves.